Welcome to Healthcare Disrupted, where conversations, topics, and innovators share how they are disrupting healthcare to change a cookie-cutter healthcare system to become more innovative, creative, and result-driven. Now, here are your hosts, Rene, Lumene, and Jasmine, Vializ.
All right. Welcome back to Healthcare Disrupted. I'm your host, Rene, Lumene.
And I'm Jasmine, Vializ.
Today is December 11th, 2020, and this is our 9th episode. We have two wonderful guests today, Joan Melendez and Dewan Hawkins. Joan has over 25 years of experience with the build and optimizing of healthcare applications, specializing in perioperative anesthesia and trauma workflows. Joan created Accelerate UDI with the goal of significantly improving patient safety at the point of care by leveraging the power of the UDI for medical devices and tissues. Dewan is a principal driver for Accelerate UDI's operational excellence, business growth, and strategic partnership within the healthcare industry. Dewan oversees Accelerate UDI's critical business functions such as sales, operations, finance, marketing, human resource, and client education. Without any further ado, welcome to Healthcare Disrupted. How you guys doing today?
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us. Glad to be here.
Awesome. So I had a great, opportunity to speak with the both of you guys last week. And, for me being in the healthcare industry, I think I may have kind of shared a little bit of my background starting off in the military. And, when I saw UDI, Accelerate UDI, the first thing, I kind of thought about was like, wow, what is this company about? And it kind of done a little bit of my research, but I am really thoroughly excited to even, learn more of the great things you guys are doing, but most importantly about our listeners. And, I just, I guess to kind of kick it off, Joan, if you don't mind, just kind of, telling us just a little bit more about yourself and your experience and kind of what kind of led you to this.
Sure. Again, thanks so much for having me on your show today. Congratulations on your 9th episode.
Thank you.
Really exciting.
Thank you.
I started off, just really curious about in healthcare way back when. I've been doing this in healthcare since I was 15. My mom's a nurse. And then just fast forward, started doing consulting for physicians' offices and then moved into the operating room area and noticed a lot of time wasted in documentation of implantable devices, in use of expired devices, and also recalled, that we were then having to go research the charts to see what patients that we implanted these items in. And then, further fast forwarding again, looking at what is available on the market to help, bridge these gaps. We want to make sure focus is on the patient. We want to make sure that people are aware of what you're implanting. You know what a VIN is, right? Your vehicle identification number. Do you know what a UDI is? Probably not. Everyone should know if you have an implant, and it doesn't matter if it's tissue or if it's a medical device like a heart cath, or even, kids have those ports for cancer treatment, right? So anything that goes in or is used on your body should have a unique device identifier, UDI.
Interesting.
So looking at the FDA, for example, there's 15 plus databases that you would have to go to see just if the medical device is recalled. So there's just so much overwhelming information.
Correct.
And how do you try to get it, and how do you try to protect the patient? And if you really look at the implants, there's been an 800% increase in recalls. That's significant.
Wow. No, absolutely.
So on that note, when you said UDI, say it again, because I want to make sure I heard you right.
Yes.
UDI, what does that stand for?
UDI is unique device identification.
Okay. All right.
And the FDI, the FDA, defined the UDI a few years ago. It went into full effect for all implantable devices, so class 2 and class 3 medical devices that are used, staplers, for example, is class 2. What you wouldn't think is a class 2 is a mask. You know, an N95, that is a class 2 medical device.
That's
So
interesting.
all of those products should have a unique device identifier. So when the FDA put this into effect, all the medical device manufacturers are supposed to have those, the barcode and what's called a human readable component on their packaging, so that, you know, we can translate and look to see, has it been recalled? Is it expired?
Right.
Human readable component. That's a pretty important
Human readable
piece, right?
component, yes.
Like,
Yeah,
not
so the
just
numbers next to the
computers,
barcode.
right. I love it. So, so when you say unique, that means unique. Each device, when it's produced, it has its own unique kind of SKU number, I guess, or even more specific, as you said, like a VIN number that says this belongs to. I'm giving this to you, Joan. So this is yours,
Right.
and if something happened, we would be able to trace
no
it.
two vehicles have the same identification number.
That's great.
Correct.
Right. So same thing with medical devices. So where we have different, you know, some medical devices might just have the, you know, basically be a model, right? Just only have a model number. That's usually like our class 1s, our Band-Aids. So those will go into effect in a couple of years, our Band-Aids. It was supposed to go into effect this year, but it was delayed because of COVID. So when we're using that UDI, it has to be in a barcode, as I said, in that human readable component, so that we can scan the barcode and we can make sure that, is it legal to be used in the United States? You know, again, is it recalled? You know, all those patient safeties, is it counterfeit? We have caught counterfeit items. You know, the medical device industry is not, you know, protected to where we won't get counterfeit items.
Gotcha.
Incredible the things that people do to make an extra buck under the table, right?
No.
Yeah, we're seeing those with the COVID test kits now, right?
Right. Yes, I've
So
heard.
again, so, you know, when you're looking at where we are right now, the danger with not being able to have a single source of information that you can trust. I mean, you can go to the FDA.
Correct.
I'm not 100% loving it right now. You know, I've seen, you know, they're a month behind in their data.
Oh, wow.
They are a government agency, right? We all,
yeah, you know, these
very
are
quick to move very
devices
slow.
that should have been pulled.
Right.
But I mean, so, you know, we have these reliable sources, but how reliable are there? And if there's so many, you know, how can we research about that device?
Joan, let me ask this question, because, you know, you mentioned there's like 15 databases of all this information.
Just for recalls.
Right. Now, is your system pulling the information from those databases, or are you, you know, pulling information from those databases and also kind of creating your own database, if you will?
Yeah, so what we've done is we have an application called UDI Clearinghouse, and it's a SaaS. So it's a software as a service application. We have scraped every single FDA database. We scrape them every day. This is why we know that, like, the recall data right now, which should be through 12/10 yesterday, on one database, it's 10/31. On another one, it's 11/24. So, you know, it should not be that way, because there are reports, like a report that we actually quote that is really not true data, because they're only looking at one of the databases.
Gotcha.
You know what I mean? So how, you know, how many more recalls or adverse events are really reported on these? And if you really look at how you go to report a medical device that you're having a problem with, I can guarantee you that maybe 20%, and that's like a good average, 20% of healthcare providers will go to the MDR or VARs to report an adverse event, because it's just way too time consuming. So again, when we have that barcode, right, we're able to, we sit on every single EMR, EHR. When we scan that barcode, we hit the good ID, which is an FDA database that says this product is a legitimate product. It's been registered with the FDA. It's gone through a 510K process if it's a novel use. Everybody knows that word now, novel use. And then we return that data back into the EHR. So it's all actionable data. So we can report on it. We can then, if there's a problem like we had last year, we had a bunch of problems with one stapler where it kept on misfiring. So the doc, you know, and I keep on asking my hospital, did you report that yet? You know, because we're trying to work with our hospitals and teaching them the importance of notification.
Absolutely.
Because if you look at the sister staplers, the other model numbers that have been recalled, the reported event that this doctor reported to us was the same.
So in a situation like that, right? And let's say a hospital's having an issue with that supply, and let's say they get right on it, right? And they, you know, submit what the issue is. There's a recall. Now, let's say hospital B may have that same stapler as well. Would they also get notified as well?
Yeah, so good question. So, you know, people assume that recalls are federally driven, and they're not. They're manufacturer driven. Recalls are voluntary.
You're right. Correct.
Okay?
You're right about that.
So it's a voluntary process. So when the manufacturer identifies a recall, they go to the FDA and say, FDA, we have this product that we want to pull. At the same time, they're notifying the FDA and writing up all of the information about it. Since they already know it's a recall, they're going and talking to their customers and saying, we're going to be recalling this product. The only problem is with that kind of method is, do you have a rep at every single hospital?
No.
You know what I mean? Are you going to your favorite hospitals? Are you going to hospitals that you don't have a relationship, Mr. Manufacturer, but your distributor does? So, you know, you have these levels of notification. So if you really look at the FDA data, if you look at the initiation date of a recall versus when the FDA actually posts the data, months, if not years later.
That's
so between those two time limits, you have recalls.
You have a lot of potential issues.
You have potential use.
Yeah.
You know, because it's been recalled. The manufacturer, I'm recalling it on November 1st, and then the FDA. Well, I'd have to back up. the manufacturer reports it like in August, and then it doesn't get reported until on the FDA website, which, you know, some people rely on, because how are recalls communicated? You want to take a guess? But how once they say we're recalling it, how are they communicating that out to?
By sending a postcard in the mail. That's what I'm just, is it very close?
You were quite close.
Yeah, it's a first class letter. So the FDA regulations say you can send it by first class letter.
Wow.
You can send it by mailgram, which was, I don't want to say outlawed, but the government actually, yeah, they did something. The government said you can't use mailgram anymore, but it's still in the language for recalls. And telegrams. So telegrams, mailgrams, and first class.
Okay.
They're not, the manufacturers can't use email yet. So I went to the FDA safety meeting a couple of weeks ago and pleaded with them to please allow us to communicate recalls through email.
Interesting. Very, very interesting.
So I want to make sure that I'm clear on the origination. So you mentioned earlier about providers reporting. So is that your system can process requests from providers or from the organizations that directly not having to go through the manufacturers, the healthcare organizations can?
Right. So before we get into that recall phase, we're going to have adverse events, right? And if a manufacturer doesn't know that their stapler is misfiring, how are they going to ever initiate a recall? Right. So if you have less than 20% of your providers reporting adverse events through MDR, it's going to take longer for that recall to even be on the radar.
Correct.
I mean, look at these breast implants, you know.
True.
Some plastic surgeons are taking, because remember there was a recall, over 4 million implants recalled.
Wow.
And that's because it's down to the lot number. right? Or the serial number. So each breast has a unique serial number. Sometimes they're packaged with with one, but usually they each have their own. And they were the textured implants. They were actually causing cancer.
Okay.
But it's not really cancer, because the minute you remove those breast implants, you remove the cancer. So they don't classify it a cancer.
Gotcha.
So, but you had all these women reporting these adverse events and falling on deaf ears. 3 more women just died in August from breast implants. And now you have docs, we've had docs, and I brought this up back in, I think it was 2015 at another FDA conference, or 2017. The COVID has gotten all my dates
blurs, a big blur, right? We'll just say 2020. Sometime this happened in 2020. We'll all say, oh, okay, 2020. Right?
Yeah, exactly. The 2025. So way back, a few years ago, I went to the FDA and said, the docs are using now, because you've removed the textured implants because they've been recalled because of the introduction of this cancer. Now what doctors are doing is they're taking the smooth ones and wrapping that with mesh. It has not been authorized by the FDA. Not been authorized by the FDA. Yet doctors around the world really are doing this. And in this country, it has not been approved.
Oh my goodness.
I think the thing that I'll just add really quickly, just to kind of take the conversation a little bit back, just from a policy perspective, is, the UDI was introduced by the FDA as a way to track these devices from the manufacturer all the way down to the patient. Because what was happening is you were having patients that were experiencing adverse events. They were having complications because they had a knee implant that was rubbing them the wrong way, their leg is swelling, whatever the circumstances are, they're communicating this to their doctor is somehow sharing this information with the manufacturer. You have these recalls that are happening, and there are other people that have that same device, whether it's a breast implant, it's a knee replacement, it's a ball joint, it's some kind of mesh, it's some kind of rod, whatever that thing is. You have so many other patients that are out there that have that same thing. And the reality of it is that the manufacturer and or the distributors have really a relationship with the hospital, not necessarily with the patient. So you have to think about this from the perspective of a recall happens. That recall is to incentivize or to enable that manufacturer to get down to not only the healthcare provider to remove the things from their shelves, right, that are bad, but also to engage with patients that have their items implanted within their bodies that also now need to have those things removed from their bodies, so that they don't also experience the same kinds of adverse events that others have experienced that warranted the recall to begin with.
Correct.
And there are breakdowns in the communication that happens between all of those lines. And so the UDI, that unique device identifier, that one number, is implemented that allows the traceability from manufacturer all the way through to the patient, with the intention for companies like Accelerate UDI to come to bring together technology that allows healthcare providers to read that UDI, that electronic barcode, to automate some of this processes, to lighten the load from the administrative staff and lighten the load from the healthcare staff, and to also make it easier for healthcare providers and manufacturers to identify patients who are also at potential risk because they have these faulty items or these unsafe items embedded within their body in some way, shape, or form. And so, the issue is broader than just a supply chain issue, right? Of how do we get things off the shelves that are bad? The issue is, how do we prevent these things from ever being implanted in another person again? And how do we communicate with people that already have those implants in them? How do we identify them and communicate with them and say, you need to get this out? You think about your car, if there's a recall on your fuel pump, You get an email, you get a phone, you got somebody calling you on your phone. You have, you have letters that are being sent to you on a regular basis saying, hey, come into your local dealership. We'll take care of this for free, da, 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 da. But you don't have that with your medical devices. And these are the things that are supposed to be improving your life or giving you life. And so when those things are, when the breakdown in communication fails, or the communication fails, it has a double impact to patients, because now you have patients who have no idea whatsoever that they're walking around with a pacemaker whose battery could just shut out on them.
At any point in time.
Or a breast implant that could cause cancer, or a heart valve that could literally stop pumping or allowing blood to go through, and they end up with an aneurysm or some other kind of thing that is life-threatening.
Or they're breaking out in a rash and they have no idea why. Right. But if they had the ability to easily report that,
right, exactly.
If they knew that they could, oh, my UDI, I just need to go in and answer a few questions because it's already in my profile.
Sure.
It's all about that knowledge of that UDI. And CMS actually put into regulation in promoting interoperability in 2019. Dewan was mentioning this. So in 2019, CMS put that regulation into play. So we have the FDA with the manufacturers on the UDI. So now the CMS is going, okay, now you need to let those patients know what they have. And you have to be able to provide them with a UDI.
So,
go ahead. Go ahead, Rene.
Well, I just want to ask one clarifying question. When a provider uses a medical device and they scan it just to make sure there's a recall or not, and let's say at that point in time, there's no recall whatsoever, right? And that device get implanted into the patient. Let's say 2-3 months down the road, for whatever reason, there's a recall, right? Does your system house? Well, so I guess
we got your back.
Right.
Yeah. So because of that promoting interoperability, anything that you implant, so the prevention. So we want to prevent. We don't, So the minute the manufacturers notify us, so when the manufacturers are notifying the hospitals of this recall, they're notifying us as well.
Okay.
So and we're putting that into our system. So the minute we're notified of that recall, they pick up that medical device and they scan it, boom, prevents them from using. The scanner vibrates in their hand, they're thrown up with a warning. But anybody that has had it prior to that date, we also provide a report and we mine the data. And because we're scanning, we're not typing, we're not making an error on that device. But we also do mine the data for the hospital. We look at when was that manufactured. We leave no stone unturned. We want to make sure that we identify every possible patient, because you can't rely on your item master, on your inventory, because somebody might have brought it in through the back door. Your patient got charged for it, but it was charged as a special item. So it's not in your inventory. So, and then the nurse didn't document it properly because it didn't have a UDI number, but we had a reference number or a catalog number. So we look at all those parameters. We look at when it was manufactured so that we can look back to that manufacturing date is when we start the audit of the charts. So if it goes back, that manufacturing date goes back 5 years ago, we go back 5 years ago to make sure that we can't find any part of that number in a chart. We've had that happen. Cement, you can't take cement out once it's put in.
Right.
So, and the hospital chose to just monitor their patients.
Interesting.
They should, had the patient known their UDI, right?
Yep.
The hospital's chosen to just monitor them. If the patient knew their UDI, we're working with another company called Track My Solutions, because they provide an electronic card for the patient, basically. So that, and it's because we need to be able to keep that communication after the patient leaves. So if it's scanned and that patient, was received that medical device within that, from that manufacturing date that we scanned, they would be notified. They would get automatic notification because Track My Solutions is hooked up with our UDI clearinghouse, so that as soon as we get notified, we push to them. So then their patients, whoever's registered, they get that warning as well. And the Track My Solutions is a free application.
Gotcha.
Right.
Go ahead.
I was just going to ask, so it sounds like there's clear cost savings here for healthcare, period, because we're talking about preventing complications if the patients that may be impacted by someone else's device, going out of whack, that you guys are going to be able to reach out and communicate well or effectively and efficiently to the patients, versus right now, there in the past, there has not been the best kind of mode of communication for all parties, right? So with that said, who exactly is the client of Accelerate? Is it the consumer? Is it the hospital system? Tell me a bit more about
hospital systems or providers if they have, like a surgical office. We also have an inventory component. It's all about patient safety, right? So right now during COVID, any healthcare provider, any healthcare system that wants to use our inventory system so that they can check these products, we give them our inventory system for free. It's not the point of care scanning, the prevention, but it's at least so that they can build their inventory, check their inventory. Because even though we have those 15 recall databases, doesn't include any of the emergency use information. So anything that's been removed or recalled for emergency use is on the emergency use website.
Another place. We'll just make it more complicated. Let's throw that over there. Yeah.
If you really think about it, that's been the challenge. I mean, you guys have an understanding of the healthcare industry. You like to think that it is as advanced as it could be.
Right.
And yes, there is some really advanced technology and advanced medicine. But when it comes to operational effectiveness in terms of just the day-to-day, it's like going back to the 50s. You have people that are, working off of, spreadsheets and flip files and clipboards of forms that have to be filled out and quadruple it. These are the inefficiencies that are ultimately impacting negatively our patient experience. So we specifically work with healthcare providers in mind to lighten the load from an administrative standpoint, to remove manual documentation with medical devices, provide that warning, the checking and the identification and the prevention of unsafe medical devices at the point of care where it really matters the most to the patient, which is at the point of care. You would not believe how many recalled devices are still in hospital supply today after months, if not years, of being recalled. There are items, if we were to do an inventory in your local healthcare facility with our application and just check to see, you would be flabbergasted at how many items that have been recalled for serious issues, life-threatening issues, that are still on the shelves. They haven't been removed, they haven't been returned, they haven't been wasted, they're just sitting there. And a lot of them make their way into the surgery room. That's why you still see these advertisements on television around, have you had a mesh implanted in you at some point, or, are you suffering from, whatever the thing is, that's because there are so many of these supplies that are still, because of integrated processes, they're still sitting in these rooms. So when, you're building your case cart for the surgery and it says, oh, I'm going to need this, this, and this. And then the person goes to the supply room to pull those supplies, they're pulling that stuff in and it then gets potentially used in a patient. And so our tool can be used at different points within the healthcare facility, but it's mostly intended at the point of care to say, okay, we're getting ready to implant cement, right? Scan, we beep. If it's recalled, if it's counterfeit, if it's expired, if it's not part of the hospital supply because a slick distributor decided to just leave it on somebody's desk and then they decided someone else picked it up and put it in this. We warn against all of that. We prevent the transfer of information into the patient record, and warn against the use of that particular item, because again, that's where our product provides the most value. It's saying, you're getting ready to use it. Let's make sure that it's safe. And if it's safe, then it will parse the information into the health record. You won't get any warnings. It's good and normal. But if it's not safe, then you know instantly that you just potentially prevented something that was not intended to do harm, but will potentially do harm to that particular patient.
Yes. That sounds like a phenomenal, I mean, everything about your concept is phenomenal for both patients. And then also, I'm sure the legal departments in the hospital systems love you guys.
Yeah, yeah. The nurses love us more than anything.
I bet, right?
Yes. Taking from 6 minutes, because if you were
looking through the system
to type that out, 6 minutes versus 5 seconds, that's a huge savings.
Oh yeah, everything costs. I mean, especially in healthcare, it's already costs us so much. The industry, and as you said, all the inefficiencies. Yes,
the focus is on the patient.
And and especially now, given the current pandemic situation, we have a majority of hospital staff has been furloughed or temporarily put on hold. Only critical staff is on board because they're handling the most severe cases. And if you're working with a surgery patient that has 16 screws in their back, right? And you have to sit there for an hour and a half to type out all the medical data into the patient's health record for each one of those screws because it's required, right? And now that's an hour and a half of your time that all you're doing is spending doing administrative work versus actually providing quality care to the patients that really need it, especially now. So
and keeping your operating rooms and your procedure rooms, which are where you're making the money, moving, right? I was just at a go live at the end of October for, just to support an electronic health record that was going live in New York. I knew that they were not going to be able to find senior analysts such as myself, and because people are not wanting to go out, so I went out to support this hospital, and it was the first time I've cried. Wow. It was just because of the burdens that are put on the nurses in documentation, because they were not using scanning. We had, in the 1 week I was there, I had 12 exposures to COVID. Wow. We didn't find out the patients had COVID until after they went through our department. You know what I mean? We had, because it was an EHR go live, that EHR company brought in others from, Kansas City and other places around the country, and introduced COVID into the workflow too. So, the nurses they need to focus on that patient.
I agree.
Whatever we can do to support them is, really where we want to be.
It's really interesting.
And it goes into our disadvantaged communities as well. So, and I'll let Dewan speak on that. But whatever we can do to help with what's a VIN, what's a UDI.
Right.
Yes. Education is key. Yeah, I find it really interesting that you're speaking about this, because we both spend a lot of time on the administrative or business side of healthcare, not really on the front end. However, we have a lot of involvement on the EHR as it kind of translates into what we do. However, I don't think I've ever really spent a whole lot of time thinking about what you just mentioned, where the nurses or the staff or, the techs are sitting there trying to verify all of these different systems. And just for one surgery, I mean, that amount of time potentially spent just on this one function, it's just a huge saver to be able to use a system like yours. I could 100% see value from all angles. So it's pretty phenomenal.
Can I buy a scan?
The interesting thing is they're not validating. They're not validating they're not doing that validation of in the CMS requirement, where you have to go make sure that product is on the FDA Good ID.
Wow. Yeah, I was asking, can I buy a scanner for myself? So when my family and myself, about to get a procedure done, I'm going to tell the doctor, let me scan it.
It'll be your favorite new Christmas gift for all your friends, right? In case you get a device implanted.
Our short goal, is, obviously, this education piece, which is why we were so excited to talk with you all and, get an opportunity to share our message with your audience is, just bringing the awareness that, you can't go into surgeries blindly thinking that, that everything is safe just because, you trust your doctor. And there are some big red flags that are happening right now. I think the other thing of it is that, our ultimate goal is to work directly with manufacturers to help offset the cost for technology like ours so that we can get it in every single healthcare facility and ultimately have some kind of certification so that, like, oh, if I go into X hospital that's in my neighborhood, or if I have to go to a hospital in my hometown, I'm going to go to this hospital because they are certified using, the latest technology to make sure that the things that they're using, from the PPE that they have on their bodies, right, to the implants they're putting in bodies, are all valid and safe, versus that hospital over there that doesn't have that certification. So, we've got a long way to go in order to make that happen. We've been having some really great conversations with manufacturers that are also, really interested in both our data warehouse called UDI Clearinghouse, but also more importantly in the barcode scanning solution that we've just been talking about, because there's shared interest, right?
Absolutely.
It provides manufacturers with mitigated risk, right, and exposure to them, because we are able to prevent unsafe devices that that may be theirs and still on shelves for being implanted. But then also we have the patient safety benefit. And for the hospital staff, to your point, we're saving them tons of time, hours upon hours every single week, that in aggregate can be redistributed back into either having somebody actually take a lunch a day, or, go home at a decent hour, or get through more surgeries within the course of the day, versus, having these bottlenecks because you have, your staff sitting at, their workstation typing in for a good 20, 30, 40 minutes at a time, following the event of a surgery.
Yeah, burnout just starts to reduce that too, I think. I mean, this burnout is for most providers less to do with the patients and more to do with all of the headaches from the red tape that we require in healthcare. So, yeah.
And then some people don't want to even document. I am done.
Yep, it's true.
I'll let somebody else. Here's the paperwork.
Yes, have fun.
An interesting factoid is that 25% of total healthcare costs in the United States is attributed to ineffective manual processes.
I agree.
Manual documentation, 25%. So if somebody's ever complaining about their hospital bill, regardless of whether they have insurance or not, 25% of that is just attributed to these ineffective manual processes attributed to documenting that our healthcare providers are required to do. And, with the technology that is accessible to us today, right, we can mitigate that. And that's the space that Accelerate comes in. We're leveraging technology that already exists. And of course, our own proprietary intellectual property, but, we're leveraging technology that is accessible to us today to reduce the risk, to mitigate this need to have manual documentation, to significantly increase the accuracy of the documentation, because you don't have errors and omissions and, flubbing with the fingers and, somebody tapping you on the shoulder to ask you a question, you forget where you were, and, all of these things. We mitigate a lot of those things, but the most important thing is we improve the experience, the healthcare experience for patients that they're receiving.
Absolutely, for sure. I mean, I think about efficiency. I think it really makes a big difference, but also too, I think about from the compliance standpoint of things too, right? I mean, what you guys have now, I'm curious to know, have you guys thought about even having an app for providers to even have on their phone where they even get alert that way as well? Is that something that you guys thought about?
So we actually, Joan and I just had a conversation a couple of days ago about an app version, and there are a couple of apps that are out there, and that is something that will likely be on our roadmap. I think the challenge that we'll have to figure out is what is the right application for that. Again, because where the value comes in for us is our ability to read that information and parse that information into the hospital systems. And that becomes a little bit challenging just from a technology perspective. But in terms of having patients or, just consumers who might be interested in learning a little bit more about like what information is out there or wanting to check their UDI, we do have our clearinghouse, which doesn't necessarily have to be accessed via an app, but it can be accessed by its website. So it can access it on any smartphone.
Well, that one's mobile.
And now it's mobile.
Now we have a mobile version of.
And the good thing of it is that our UDI clearinghouse isn't just checking one source of data. We're consolidating all of these pieces of data into one warehouse, our warehouse. I would argue that we have the most complete single data set in the entire United States around medical device use and history and recalls, because we're consolidating them all into one spot. And if you have, like your paperwork from your hospital and you look at, what was implanted, it'll have your UDI on there. And if you type that in or you search for, that particular item, you'll be able to see whether or not there's ever been a recall or an adverse event or something like that against that.
Right. I think from the patient perspective too, one of the greatest values that your system has is to be able to not just support the ones that are about to go into a patient, but what about the one that needs to get recalled, making sure that whomever just really recently received that can be notified effectively and efficiently. And that in itself, I think, has so much value for all people, but, especially on the patient side, knowing that, they're going to be protected, that there's someone who's advocating for their health and well-being with this device, and not having to worry about experiencing, like the examples we talked about earlier, the rashes, cancers and things, and not have any idea of a potential cause, just chalking it up to, well, it's cancer. Well, if you just removed the implant, right, and then eventually that word might get back to them based on that particular implant, but it might happen a lot faster with a system like yours, and working directly with manufacturers as well, I think is key.
Yeah, and I think that, us partnering with Track My Solutions as well, I think is critical for the patient, because Track My Solutions is free for the patient. They can go and register. If you have implants right now, go register your implants. If you don't know what they are, go register your knee, and then they'll help you contact your hospital. You have 10 years to get that information, right? Hospitals only keep those records for 10 years. You should know everything that's in your body. That way, if you register all your little implants with Track My Solutions, if anything goes wrong with any one of them, they notify you. And again, it's free.
Great tip.
Just think about that. Think about your aunts, your uncles, your grandparents, anybody.
People just popped in my head as Joan was saying that. I'm like, I should probably send a message or something.
Yeah, and just think about it. They leave surgery. Let's say they have a hip replacement. They leave surgery. They're now focused on recovery, and they may have physical therapy and blah, blah, blah. They also have like tons of paperwork, that they may understand and they may not, or whatever, but it's just paperwork, but if they had a surgery 15 years ago, right, and there was a recall that ever happened and they've moved, let's say hypothetically, so they don't even get notified that there was a recall on their replacement hip, and they go back to the hospital to say, oh, well, hey, I heard through the news that this hip replacement that I think I have in my body was recalled. Can you check that for me? If they had that 15 years ago, the hospital won't even have record of it.
Right.
Wow.
So they will never know if they don't keep the paperwork. So we're putting a lot of burden on patients around record keeping. Really, we should be supplying from a healthcare industry perspective.
Correct.
Yeah, since 2018, I just did a quickie lookup. Since 2018 till now, there have been 416 hip recalls.
Wow.
That's a lot.
It is.
Oh my goodness. And people are not thinking about those kinds of things. They say have things, ailments and whatnot. And it's especially nowadays where we usually just take the next pill to kind of cover it up. And then eventually there's a, kind of a complication that requires them to go under surgery again and, under the knife again. And who knows if it even at that point that they recognize that it's a device. Hopefully they've looked, they've researched it and gotten your system in place to know at least, effectively. So,
yeah. And then there were 4,143 adverse events.
So that's a great question, actually. So when a patient reports, so let's say it starts with them, at what point, I assume there's got to be a certain number per device or whatever percentage that says this is when we can take it back to the manufacturer or to actually request it to be recalled. At what point can that take place, I should say?
Well, that was changed with the current administration.
Oh.
Okay.
So yeah, it's we have these, like novel, we all know that word new right now because of the coronavirus, and we have novel virus.
Right.
Same thing, novels used in medical devices too. If let's say I have a Band-Aid and I have a coating on the Band-Aid, and I'm saying, oh, that Band-Aid coating is really doing good on mending the tissue around the bone. I can go to the FDA and say, hey, can I take my Band-Aid, my 10-cent Band-Aid, and now I want to use it for the bone? Oh, sure, just do a 510K. That's all that has to be done.
Wow.
So they get that novel use because the government wants innovation.
Understand.
But at the risk of
health,
impacting the patient.
And also within this regulation, healthcare manufacturers are not held accountable. Kind of like what they're trying to do right now with this COVID stuff, where he's trying to add on something saying that the manufacturers aren't going to be held responsible, or I think it's the meat packing companies or something aren't going to be held accountable. So it's taking the responsibility away from the person who really initially caused the harm.
Right. Oh man.
Wow.
So tell me a bit more about the advocacy piece. So education, we talked about with the patients, letting them know about the tool that you're partnering with. What other kinds of things? I mean, you mentioned quite a bit of involvement in some advocacy. I'd love to learn a little bit more about what you guys are doing there.
I can take that. I was going to kick it over to Joan, but I'll talk about one piece. Actually, I guess I won't because there's a little bit of going on. Joys of living in New York City. You guys are getting hot off the presses. Hopefully they're not getting anything implanted.
Exactly. You should flag them down and make sure they're going to the right hospital that's used your software.
I'll kick it over to Joan because I think she can talk a little bit more about the work that she's specifically doing with the FDA and with some of the medical device learning communities and the support around that. But we are really excited because from the inception of our organization, we've been hyper focused on ensuring that we're able to impact the healthcare inequities that exist, not only just within the industry, but most specifically within underrepresented communities and more specifically within communities of color. That is a personal passion of mine and Joan's, and we built our company around diversity, inclusion, and equity, specifically to address that. So we're actually launching in the new year our what we're calling our Accelerate Equity program, which has 3 pillars that focuses on training, investment, and access, specifically for the healthcare industry. And what that means for us is, from an advocacy perspective, we're not just putting an application out there just for the purpose of profits. We are a values-based organization that's providing real-time positive value to the patient experience, but we also want to give back to our community. So with this equity program, we will be, providing, education for young minds to help invest in the development of the young minds that are out there that are considering a degree or a career in healthcare in whatever capacity. So we'll have more coming around that in the new year, but also, making specific investments to help support, those that are going to school or seeking a trade, et cetera. And the spirit of, of scholarships, to ensure that we're able to help assist financially where we can and invest in those communities. But then more importantly, looking at communities that are underserved and most specifically that are underfunded, and providing our application in some instances, in most instances where that is the case, free of charge, specifically for underrepresented communities that are already struggling as it is when it comes to healthcare equity and having the right tools and the resources and the supplies and the technology to ensure that those patients that are coming in for care are getting quality care. And oftentimes when it boils down to budget, technologies like ours kind of falls by the wayside, because nurses today, doctors today are already writing everything out manually. So it doesn't make a difference if they just continue to do that, when, we can actually make a meaningful difference in the livelihood and the healthcare experience for the patients altogether.
Oh, absolutely. Are you guys working at all with any federally qualified health centers or like rural health centers? Have you looked in that space at all?
We're exploring that, quite heavily. I think the challenge that we have right now, is the entire world is on pause and is doing what they can to fight COVID, right? So that's unfortunately that's the mountain we're up against. So we're hopeful that messages like this kind of get to the ears that need to hear it. Hopefully with some vaccines that are on the horizon. And we can talk a little bit about the efficacy perhaps at another time of those vaccines, but but there is hope, that in the new year, we can return to somewhat of normalcy, at least from the healthcare perspective, and bring, our nurses back, our administrators back, start doing elective surgeries and things of that nature, which will then warrant, a further look at solutions like ours, to help support, federally funded healthcare facilities.
Wonderful. Yes, I 100% understand what you're saying. The world's a bit on pause, especially for new ventures that aren't going to directly help them with their current challenge of COVID and just surviving COVID, basically.
What's wild is that, it's not just COVID support that's happening in the healthcare facilities. They are doing critical surgeries. And that's also where our solution comes in. It brings the most value. Right. You can ensure that when you are doing, some kind of heart surgery or some kind of like significant open wound or whatever, that the supplies that you're using are not putting the patient at risk and opening up the healthcare facility for additional risk. Because, let's face it, you go home and you just had like some kind of surgery and you're having all these complications. What are you going to do? Number one, you're going to seek help. And number two, you're going to call a lawyer because you're like, I'm going to sue the pants off of these guys for hurting me more than what I was hurting before. So, it's tough getting the message through with all the noise of COVID, but, again, it's our responsibility to continue to beat the drum and to build the case and, just, again, make impact where we can.
I love that you still continue to do that hard work, even up against the challenges.
Absolutely. And so I'm kind of curious. So whenever there is, adverse events, due to a medical device, and then at some point your system pick it up, do you feel that your services or your scanning device has that helped to mitigate lawsuits for hospitals or surgical centers?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. So, because the minute we find out about that recalled event, it's programmed in our system. So, we had back last November when another stapler recall, I think we had there were 30 something stapler and suture recalls within a very short amount of time last year. So, again, we prevent that use, we stop it from being even used. So it's that stop of prevention, and that's where we really want to focus. So we stop that adverse event from happening, right? If there's an adverse event in the facility, if you look at the MDR report that a physician would have to fill out, they would look at it and just go, yeah, I'm not doing it, right? So with our application, if something happens like a misfire will know when they're suturing in the patient. It's not like they go, oh, let me do a sample fire. No, because all of the staples are, one after another. So they staple. So when we know there's an adverse event in the field, he'll say there's an adverse event. Our application's running right in the background because we've already scanned it. All the nurse has to do is highlight that, indicate misfire, and then it goes and it sends it off to the quality department. We notify the FDA and we notify the manufacturer, because the manufacturer needs to know. What we do now, we report the things so much after the fact. I could go on about COVID and the Pfizer immunization or the vaccine that was just approved, because you have to look at what are all the steps to keep that adverse event from happening, and how can you communicate efficiently and effectively when that is happening now, when you need to know, not a month from now.
Absolutely.
A month from now is not going to do you any good.
Just from a operations perspective, you may have folks that are, risk and quality and legal kind of like listening and whatnot. Here's just a couple of numbers just to, kind of ground the conversation. It's been reported that about $6 billion is spent every single year on recall medical device management. Just in recalls, $6 billion. Then now that's baked into your healthcare costs, right? Yes, because they have to recoup that, and it's shared between the healthcare facilities and the manufacturers. What we also know is that on average, the average lawsuit payout for, a medium adverse event to something that could be, that's not quite life-threatening, because life-threatening, you're talking about millions, but something that is adverse events that's causing a little bit more harm than good. That can be somewhere around $500,000 per case in terms of just the payout, not the legal fees that are incurred by the healthcare facility and potentially the patient in order to get to that kind of solution. So if we are able to prevent just one bad item, one unsafe item every single year, and hospitals, these surgical centers are doing thousands of surgeries every single week.
Right.
So if we're able to prevent just one, that pays for our application multiple times over.
Right.
So from a risk perspective, right, the hospitals and healthcare facilities and surgical centers are taking on more risk by not having our solution, even though there's a cost up front to, we're a business, so there's a cost to apply it, but the risk that you mitigate, right, that is immediate and future, is significant. And let's be clear, your frontline workers, your surgeons, your OR managers, your nurses, they never see the litigation, right? That's legal that sees that, right? That's legal that sees that. So, all your healthcare workers are thinking about is, I'm just doing my surgery and going to the next one, doing the surgery and going to the next one. Meanwhile, you have, your CEOs, your COOs, your chief legal officers, your, heads of risk and quality and all of those that are looking at, these lawsuits that are coming after them because of these novel solutions that have been implemented, or these medical devices that were purchased because, we're in a pandemic and now we have to source through different sources. And now we have things that are packaged like they are supposed to be packaged, but the item inside of it is actually counterfeit because they're getting their medical supplies from different suppliers. This is a whole lot of risk that we could actually avoid for the healthcare provider and for the patient with a barcode scan.
Correct.
And
Clear
PPE
value.
Huge. PPE is the biggest right now. There's been a lot of removal of complete lines of manufacturers. ECRI just did a study on some PPE, and healthcare providers can actually send their masks to ECRI for testing because they're finding that they're between 20 and 35% effective. Oh, not 95%.
Interesting. Very interesting.
Not to be doom and gloom.
No, but it's
reality.
It is. It's
reality.
reality.
So that's what we all need to know.
And
Yeah.
yes, keep us informed. There's huge value in what Accelerate does. That's the bottom line there. So for everybody, because it's saving lives. I mean, and what the providers and our healthcare industry is focused around, it's just trying to support them, right? It's trying to make sure that they can do their jobs and not harm the patients, unfortunately, along the way, or even themselves, like with the safety of PPE. Yeah,
absolutely.
Exactly. And, one thing I wanted to say is that, I think about whenever an adverse event occurs, I think the beauty about your system is that it's going to show how the hospital or surgery center, how proactive they were in being able just to, report that, right? I think that plays a big factor, if a patient decides to sue, because sometimes, they always say, if something wrong happened, report it, because it shows that you're trying to show good faith, that you're trying to do the right thing and making sure that that the awareness is out there and you're trying to correct it so that it doesn't continue to happen. And your system, it allows hospital systems and whoever use it to be able to do just that. So that's crucial.
Yeah. And one thing just to add on that, look at where we are right now with COVID.
Yeah.
Reporting of adverse events is going to be critical. These are emergency use authorization products. They're right now, again, they're in a very confined, controlled process, especially like with the Pfizer one. There's 3 different time limits within the Pfizer drug, right? Because it has a diluent added to the drug. It has to be defrosted before the diluent's added. It has a time limit, 2 hours, 15 minutes, and then you can't use it after 6 hours. So if a patient has an adverse event, what could it be a result from? It could be a result at any one of those stages, right? In a controlled study, we're not going to have those added risk areas because they are doing everything within those time limits. They have the right person pulling the medication. They're all multi-use vials. So on the Pfizer, it's 5 doses per vial. On the Moderna, it's 10 doses per vial. So you have medical devices you're introducing. Can a syringe or a needle be recalled? Oh, you betcha.
Yeah.
Can the additive, the diluent that's being added, be recalled? Yes, there's several recalls for the 0.9% sodium chloride. How do we know that it's not one of those? Or if we run out of one that's that we're purchasing and we have some on our shelf, how do we know that there's all these added risk points where the healthcare provider, if you go look at VARs, I welcome you to go look at VARs. There's 2. You either do VARs on the computer and it'll take you about an hour to fill out the form, or you can download the PDF and then send it in.
Eesh. Okay.
Crazy.
Downloading, and you can't even type into the PDF, right? It's like download, and it's not even.
No. So we've totally tooled our application in order to, so now we're not only doing medical devices and biologics, but because vaccines are technically managed by CBER, Center for Biologics, not CDER, Center for Drugs.
Gotcha.
You know what I mean? So you have to follow those biologic regulations.
Gotcha.
So our application does. When you go to a pharmacy, what are they used to following? They're going to know CDER,
correct,
the Centers for Drugs. They're not going to know CBER as well.
Gotcha. That's good to know. Very good to know.
Yeah, thank you for offering those nuggets. That's very valuable information for us, everybody, as they're moving into the next phase of COVID. We roll out
You betcha. If I ever have to have surgery, I'm gonna ask them, have you checked that UDI on that device? I need
Good job. Yes. Yeah, say I want those boxes so I can check my UDI.
There you go.
Check my own.
Regardless of whether you have insurance or not, you're paying a pretty penny for any kind of implantable device. So at the very least, you should be able to come away with, knowing what your UDI is so you can validate that
Correct.
Some peace of mind, right? Some peace of mind.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Well, guys, so one question I do have for you guys. So for your company, it's very innovative, and I think what you guys are doing, you're definitely pushing the envelope and with what you're currently doing now. So as a healthcare disruptor, what innovative approach has your company taken to change healthcare?
Yeah, for us, knowledge and technology is key.
Yeah.
One of the things that we've learned is that healthcare providers have kind of put up with and kind of resonated with the fact that I just have to do it because I have to do it this way because this is the way that it is. And we're here to say that our impact in the healthcare industry is, using technology in a way to mitigate, the pain points around documentation, around the efficacy of your devices, and really give you the capability to deliver the kind of quality care that most healthcare providers got into the industry in order to provide. I can't think of a single individual that got into healthcare to say, I want to spend 25% of my time, documenting, multiple screens and, filling out the same information multiple times. Most people that get into healthcare are doing it because they want to help other people. And we are disrupting that notion that you have to work harder in order to do that.
Yep. No, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. So if companies, people want to hear more about this company, or if they want to find your website, are you guys on social media? Please let our listeners know exactly where they can find you guys.
Yeah, so you can find us practically everywhere. Our website is www.accelerate.com. You can find us on social medias under accelerateudi.com. And I let me rephrase that. Our website is www.accelerateudi.com. Make sure that was corrected. But yeah, and the same thing for our socials. You can find us there. But if you want to get in contact with us, just shoot us an email at info@accelerateudi.com, and we'd love to hear from you.
Awesome. Wonderful. Well, guys, thank you so much for being on Healthcare Disrupted. And you guys provided valuable information. I learned a lot, and I tell you, I'm going to be a different type of patient when I go to the hospitals. They're going to be like, who have you been talking to? And I'm pretty sure our listeners are going to gain a lot more insight about you guys, your company, and what you can do. And this has been a true pleasure to speaking with you guys and learning. So thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, guys. Thank you so much for having us.
Wonderful learning about Accelerate. Thank you guys so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. Be sure to check back for new episodes of Healthcare Disrupted. Find out more at www.healthcaredisrupted.org. Until next time.